Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Guys, before we know it, we're going to be fishing summer patterns. Depending on where you're at within the country, you may be potentially pre-spawn, you could be spawn, you could be post-spawn, and you could be getting into the summer months already. You know, I think for the most part, most anglers out there are probably looking at the spawn to post-spawn period, and that's what I want to do today. I want to talk about my top 5 post-spawn baits, because post-spawn is probably the most picky time of the year for what the bass are willing to eat. You know, they're coming off the spawn. At that point, they're a little bit more lethargic. They've expelled a ton of energy guarding the beds and doing the whole mating process. And now they're looking at transitioning from the spawning grounds out to the deeper summer places that they're going to stay at. Some of the fish, the males will probably guard fry for a while and stay a little bit shallower. The females just seem like they disappear at times. They can be really tough to get. It's almost like they don't do anything for a week or two after spawning, and then they show up on the ledges and you catch them on the ledges. But that period between the spawn and when they get out into their deep summer water is such a tough period of time. I mean, that's when you see tournament weights really drop off. The fish are skinny. They're just not willing to bite. So in my opinion, the post-spawn period is probably the single most important time when it comes to choosing the correct baits, because not all baits will work. That's for definitely sure during that time period. So I want to go over what works for me, kind of tell you where and how I like to use each one, because I do think it matters. Before I get into that, I do want to remind you guys that if you're having some post-spawn blues on your local lakes and you want a little bit of help, check out the lake breakdowns that I do with fishthemoment.com. The link to Fish the Moment is in the description of the video. It's a really good way to get some help and some guidance as to how to break down your lakes from either myself, Randy Blockett, or Johnny Schultz. We're all doing the lake breakdowns there, and it's just a really easy way for you guys to get some good solid advice as to how to approach your lakes. Also, if you're looking to support the channel and you're buying tackle at Tackle Warehouse, please use the affiliate link that I put in the description of the video. It's a great way to support the channel. Every small purchase helps, and if you want to continue to do it in the future, bookmark the link that I have in the description. It's a great way, and it's very much appreciated to those of you who have been using the link. It's just a really good thing to do to support the channel, and all that money comes right back into the channel and helps produce a little bit higher content, which is where we're headed. You know, I've got a lot of big plans for this summer in terms of making higher quality videos and getting a lot more on the water footage. I've already started to pump out more on the water footage because we don't have ice on the water. And we're starting to get to the point now where water temps are creeping up into the range where fishing should get pretty good. We're still a ways away from post spawn here, but for those of you that are down south, you probably are already in the post-spawn phase to some point. So let's get right into this. My number one bait for catching post-spawn fish is a Wacky rig. A Wacky rig with whatever your favorite soft plastic stick bait is. Mine is the Maxcent Berkeley General. It really just comes down to fishing this weightless and being extremely patient. But a Wacky rig is one of the most versatile baits during the pre-spawn because of the fact that it's not intimidating to the fish, and they will eat this over most of the other baits. The other baits I have are much more situational. This bait, I feel like you can pretty much throw everywhere, but you need to fish it weightless, and you need to be fishing it in areas where you think they spawned out to where you think they're transitioning to. Those are the areas that work the best for it. But the key here is you're fishing slow. The problem with a weightless Wacky rig is you're not covering much water. That's why I feel like you really want to concentrate on areas where you know that there's fish. And that's where some of these other baits come in. They will help you identify those areas where fish are, and then you can slow down with the Wacky rig. So when it comes to trying to find fish, the post-spawn period is potentially the number one time where a topwater bait will outproduce all other baits. I'm not saying it's as simple as put on a topwater bait and you'll catch fish, but I'm simply saying that the post-spawn period can produce some of the best topwater fishing of the year. It seems like the bass that are recovering are much more willing to hit a topwater because of the fact that most topwaters mimic a bluegill to a point. A lot of times during the post-spawn, depending where you're at in the country, you've got a shad spawn going on, which makes the topwater bait really well. And I think a lot of those fish, because they're just up in shallow water, are much more available to hit a topwater bait. You know, if the fish are spawning in 4 feet of water or less, that's really not much water that you have between the bottom and the topwater, which makes that topwater sit pretty much right in the fish's face. So a topwater bait is an excellent bait to use during the pre-spawn or post-spawn. Now I've got a couple of different ones that I like to use now, and you might say that they're the same, but they're really not. So the first one is the Berkeley Chapo, and I like to use a smaller size. So this is the Chapo 90. I like to throw a smaller size because, again, it's not a big intimidating bait, and something like this bluegill pattern one really mimics the size of the bluegill that are up shallow as well. And as we all know, the bass have been having their beds raided by bluegill throughout the spring, and this is their time to get back at the bluegill. So a smaller Chapo like the Chapo 90 is really a good bait for covering water. The problem with a bait like this is a lot of times when you're fishing shallow, you're fishing through areas that have weed or a lot of debris or a lot of different types of cover in the water. And because that's a treble hooked bait, it doesn't come through really well. And if you've got areas that have a little bit more weed or some, you know, some substance that's floating on the surface, whether it's like small hyacinth or just broken up weed clumps, if you're on a place like a Gunnersville where you just have weed floating all over, at that point, the Chapo won't work. But that's when I'll switch over to a buzzbait, like my favorite, which is the Dirty Jig Scott Canterbury Pro Buzz. A bait like this will be similar along the lines to the Chapo, but you can get through more weedless or more areas that have that debris on the surface, or you got weeds that you're bringing the bait over. You know, a lot of times this time of year, you start having weeds that are reaching the surface where you could work a buzzbait over the top, but you can't work a treble hook because the treble hook's catching the little pieces of weed clumps that are growing to the surface. So a bait, you know, like this buzzbait will draw those fish up through the weeds, but it still allows you to cover water. Remember, the buzzbait and the Chapo, for me, are more about locating where the fish are at so that I can then slow down and really get them with the soft stick bait. But I love a good buzzbait. You know, the Dirty Jig ones really just make a ton of really good squeaking sound. It just has a different sound to it, but they run really true, and that's why I love to throw a good buzzbait. So at that point, that leaves me with the last type of topwater bait that I think truly excels during the post-spawn, and that is a frog. And the key here with the frog is this is potentially the most weedless bait that's even made. So if I run into an area where now I can't throw a buzzbait because I've got too much surface debris, or I've got more of a filament or LJ bloom or something along those lines that's going on, or I need to get my topwater bait back into a laydown tree or under bushes or under docks, and I don't feel comfortable using a treble hook bait or even the buzz bait, that's where a frog comes in. This is a Spro Dean Rojas, just the Spro Bronzeye 65. I like to throw it in bluegill imitating colors, and that's what I consider a fire tiger to be. But really, the key here is a lot of times when those fish are done spawning, they'll guard fry that's still around some sort of cover. So you may have a clump of weed and the bass will hang out by the weed as their fry goes in and out of the weed. You may have a lay down tree, you may have a bush. The bass are still guarding the fry, but you can't fish a lot of these other baits through that stuff. That's where a frog really outshines the other baits. And the frog, in my opinion, the best time to use this is during the post-spawn period. So you gotta have a frog tied on. This is one of the, not just one of the most exciting ways to catch one, but it's also one of the best ways to catch a big fish. So once I've thrown those topwater baits, I now have identified the areas that work the best, or that have what I would consider the best population of fish, and I'll slow down and throw the max scent general. The other bait that really shines very, very well during the post spawn are your flukes. This is just a Zoom super fluke. This works so well because, again, it's very, very, you know, it's a very uninvasive bait. You know, it's very much like the general in that it doesn't create a ton of noise, doesn't create a ton of vibration. It doesn't really spook the fish. It's something that gives off the imitation of a dying shad, and that the fish, you know, are going to be drawn to that because it's an easy meal. And again, like I said before, a lot of places in the country you're talking about a shad spawn that's going on during this time. Well, if the fish are keying in on shad, a fluke style bait is definitely a good way to go. So those are the baits that I'll throw. You know, the fluke I can cover a little bit more water with, but again, it's a slow moving bait. So I like to identify those areas that the fish are at first by using topwater baits. Then I'll slow down and really pick apart those areas. So guys, I'm telling you, if you're looking for a little bit of help during the post-spawn period, try giving these baits a try if you haven't done so already. And if you've got baits that you really like to use during the post-spawn period, please put them in the comment section so that the rest of the viewers can learn from you guys as well. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and stay tuned. We got another video coming out tomorrow.